what is a cold open? A cold open definitely is a place in podcasting. They work for a certain type of show, again, in my opinion. It can cover the basics easily and effectively. The only thing is it lacks that pop. It lacks that pomp and circumstance and the flavor it can add to your overall product. Like, that intro I just played for you, that is all me. That is my heart and soul. And that's the kind of the attitude I wanted towards that podcast. But if you're someone who just doesn't have the resources to do that, you can do a cold open, which is just none of that. It's just you starting the podcast. At the beginning of this podcast was a cold open. It's a great thing for a beginner or for someone who is just learning. A cold opening should always cover the name of the podcast, the host, the topics covered, and where the podcast can be found on social media. So, a cold open means that there's no music, there's no pre-recorded segment. It can be as simple as, what's going on, everyone? I'm blank, and welcome to blank. Today, we're going to be talking about blank. And that's it. That's as easy as it can be. That is a cold open. So, the pros of something like that, you just jump right in. There's no wasting time. People's attention spans are super short these days. So if you don't want the pump and circumstances an intro, you just want to get straight to business, straight to the brass tacks, if you will, you can do that. So there's a pro there. And also, it cuts down the length of your podcast. If you're someone who wants your podcast to be a crisp and clean 15 minutes, you don't need to waste that minute and a half or 2 minutes I played you on that intro I had. You can just get right into it. Especially if it's a daily podcast, right? But it's also the biggest pro. It's always an option, meaning you don't need to be an experienced audio editor to do a cold open. Or like if for some reason you're in the process of getting a new intro and you don't want to use your old intro anymore, you can just go back to it. You can always do it. It is old faithful. It's old reliable. Christian, any more pros you can think of for cold open?
I mean, I think you really went through them all.
Yeah.
You can get right into it. You don't have to boggle yourself down with like, oh, I need an intro. I need this. Like, I need a website. No, you don't. Just jump right in. Just get started.
Yeah.
And it, like you said, if it's already a shorter podcast, maybe you just need to get straight to the point and not. And if it's a daily podcast too, people are just they might start skipping it.
Got to.
So these are things to think about.
I mean, skipping it's fine. That plus 5 second button's there for a reason.
Right.
And I always keep that in mind when I'm creating content. But the cons to a cold open, it can be a little confusing, right? Because if someone's new to your podcast, it's going to be like, well, what am I listening to? What is this? They need an introduction to your content. So you can still do that. It's just a little difficult and it's a little bland because you don't get to show off. You don't get to show off your show, meaning a well-produced intro can make an average podcast sound professional. Like, it made me, a podcaster for the very first time with plenty of audio issues, that intro made the King's Rings podcast sound way more cool than it actually was.
And uniformity.
Yeah, that too.
From one episode to another. Not to mention, instead of you're letting the intro do a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah.
Because, on the podcast, you might be saying what it's about. You might be saying this podcast, we're gonna jump right in and we're gonna talk about the hottest cars around. It's doing the intro for you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were visually showing people, but in this case, in audio, just letting the audio do the work for you, and then you can elaborate. But it's already kind of getting you a jump start, and you have to say a little bit less. You really just jump into the topic, or you could fade in mid conversation. Mm-hmm. If there's an intro that thoroughly explains what the show's going to be about.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of one of the pros. It does a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
Exactly. It hides your flaws too. But okay, Chris, let's do a sample. You and me. Let's do an example of a cold out intro. So you're going to be my guest. You're going to be Christian Wright, founder of Cube Recording Studios.
Split screen here.
So, you just got to be yourself. So we'll do Talking with Tarashuk.
Cool.
And welcome, everyone, back to Talking with Tarashuk podcast. This is your first time. My name is Will Tarashuk. That's T as in Thomas, Arashuk. And this is Talking with Tarashuk, the podcast where I, the founder of Cube Recording, the founder of Ambiguous Podcast Solutions, talks to anyone I generally find interesting. That can be authors, that can be musicians, that can be rappers, that can be life coaches, that can be anything and anyone in between. My guest today is the founder of Cube Recording Studios by the name of Christian Wright. And we are actually in his studio right now in Montclair, New Jersey. Christian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
See?
Even though this is my studio.
You know,
Happy to have you here.
Yeah, happy to have me here.
Happy to have you here.
Right?
You
So
know?
other than my flub of calling myself the founder of Cubic Recording Studios, that is a cold open, right? You just
It's information.
It's information. That is the first thing this listener will hear. You know, I said the Talking to Tarashuk podcast, who I am, what the show is, what we do, and since I have a guest, I introduce my guest. You know, I didn't do any social plugs, but that's fine. I can do it at the end. So that's a cold open. It's always an option, and I hope you use it.
Yeah.
I actually do use it for every single one of my podcasts. I do both. I do a cold open and a pre-recorded intro. So go ahead, Christian.
I was saying, once you get used to it, then you can add color. You could throw a joke in or something like that. But
it takes practice.
It takes practice,
It takes
and
practice.
once it's a pitch essentially.
Yeah.
You know.
We're looking at it.
But once you have the pitch down, then it becomes less robotic. It becomes more fluid, and you can build upon it.